I just knew there was something wrong with me. It was one of my suicide attempts. I think I was sort of sat on the floor and my sister had come and the ambulance was on the way. And the comments were, let's kill her. Let's kill her dogs. Let's stab her to death. I was put on a police patrol. I didn't sleep for 5 days. I lost 3 stone in 2 days. I knew that everything about me was different.
Hello and welcome to Leaders in Disguise. My name is Gary Parsons and I'm your podcast host. In these episodes, we are encouraging leaders of all disguises to unmask and show their vulnerability. In a world of stigma where it still exists, I ask you to listen very carefully and celebrate their success with me. In this episode, we talk to the amazing Rebecca or Becky Brown of SimpliciB, and she is talking to us about the amazing connection between the food that we eat and the impact that it has on our mental health. Through her own experience of mental health, including borderline personality disorder, suicide attempts and PTSD, Becky talks about the impact that it's had on her life and a life-changing world that diet has impacted for her. This podcast wouldn't be possible without you, so if you're not already subscribing, please click subscribe in the app that you use and comment on any social media platforms that you see. We're always reading reviews, we're always reading comments, and it helps us make a better show. So without further ado, let's chat with Becky Brown of SimpliciB. Welcome to Leaders in Disguise, Becky. Thank you very much for coming along. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm really good, thank you.
So people that are watching will see that I'm in short sleeves for the very first time. I don't know, but I feel like the studio is probably about 28 degrees right now. So are we cool? Are we all right?
We're cool right now.
The fan's been on. Let's see how quickly it disappears. So yeah, thank you very much for coming on Leaders in Disguise. Absolutely a conversation that I wanted you to come along, and I'm so excited that you're here. But there's going to be people that are watching, that are listening, that don't know who Becky Brown is and what you do. So just for the people that are listening, could you just give us a quick flavour of what you're about, what's led you to where you're at, and we'll dig into it a little bit further. Yeah,
so I think from a sort of career perspective, my background is I'm a qualified lean practitioner, lean Six Sigma green belt.
It's a foreign language for so many people.
Yeah, it's not karate. Green belt, I'm not karate. It's basically I'm qualified at looking at people's businesses, processes, and look at what the end goal is in terms of customer satisfaction, cost, time to produce something. And I'm one of the people that go in and look at how we can improve the efficiency on that. So increase customer satisfaction, costs down, higher quality, more productivity. And I've sort of was doing that for, shows my age, but over maybe 20 years. But yeah, it was actually in lockdown by accident. There was never an intention there that I started my own food business, because in lockdown, when I saw people panic buying food, it really sort of pulled on the heartstrings. So on my own Facebook, I just started sharing videos of really simple, quick, easy recipes to help people, not panic buy food. And the comments that I was getting on the posts were, you must have had all day, that must have cost a fortune. And really over a period of time, what I realised is that in the UK as food consumers, we really are uneducated when it comes to our food choices for many reasons. And there's been many iterations of the business, but I'm finally at a point now where I sort of know what the purpose of the business is, and that's delivering food awareness, food education, workshops, predominantly to employees, but we're dipping the toe in the NHS and the education system at the moment.
Wow. So a busy 4 years then, since 2020 when this has changed, and And you don't look it, by the way. I know they say that to every guest, but you don't look like you've been in process improvement for 20 years. That's a positive thing. Talking to you before the podcast and the research calls that we do beforehand, I know you know your stuff. So
Thank you.
I'm excited to get into it with you. And it's great to hear that you're really changing that educating people. I know we look out there to like the Joe Wicks of, I've got about 4 books of Joe Wicks's Lean in 15, and I almost feel like you are the equivalent, I don't know, of healthy foods. So I don't know if you are or that's the goal. It's absolutely. I see your videos and I see how many comments you get, and you tend to put them on LinkedIn, which is really interesting because like Joe puts them on Instagram and places like that. But your target market is really employers and their employees. Are you really? Why go down that route? What?
Yeah, so that there is, everything's by design. There's a lot of thought process that goes behind what I put on social media. I'm always looking for themes so that people don't get confused. And I sort of pick which platform is the best to talk about certain things. So on Facebook and on Instagram, it's a sea of, funny memes about kale. Because even I can take a joke about kale. It's got food videos and cooking videos, and this is what I had for my tea tonight. But really, in terms of LinkedIn, because it is a business platform, the videos that I do where I'm talking about the truth really behind food that we're buying, once you strip away that label that says it's high in fibre, it's a good source of protein, it's a good source of calcium. Once you take that away, and I'm exposing what's really in these ingredients that are, and it's a sweeping statement, and I always do a caveat, but generally are linked to ADHD, autism, neurodiversity, stress, depression, anxiety. I put them intentionally on LinkedIn because I want employers to see that. Because I read a paper recently that I think it's something around 70% of the UK workforce are addicted to ultra-processed foods, which those sort of symptoms that I've just talked about come hand in hand with those foods. And my ethos, and I truly believe that if employers look after their employees first and make sure that they're healthy and happy, the employer reaps the benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate my retort, I guess, on that would be look after the leaders as well, because if they can understand they're different, the way that they eat, the way that they think, then suddenly they'll see the benefits and then they'll be more compassionate, they'll be more motivated to get their employees as well. And I do, absolutely get what you're saying, because one of the examples that you spoke to me about, and we won't use brand names, but these typical fajita kits that you get in the supermarket for, I don't know, sometimes you get them on offer on the middle aisles. Yeah. And they're like $1.99 and you go, brilliant, an easy food prep.
Yeah.
But the amount of chemicals that are in those packets, and you don't get half of what you need in there anyway, do you?
Absolutely, yeah. So that one, for example, I did do a video about it, and it was once you'd taken away all this horrible, nasty packaging that this food's been sat in, it's three ingredients for £2, £2.50. So, you've got the environmental side of it, but also those 3 ingredients you can get in the same aisle anyway. And what always alarms me when I'm researching these ingredients, because I always say I'm not an expert and I'm not trying to be, I just do my research to make it easier for my audience. Why are we saying that these ingredients are safe?
Yeah.
That worries me.
We get it approved, don't we? I know in America it's at the FDA. In the UK it's like we get that rubber
We've
stamp.
got the Food Standards Agency and all different realms of it. But if I sort of Googled a tomato, I guarantee that nowhere would it say this is safe to eat as long as it's in small consumption. So it always frightens me when these chemicals, these processed foods, these ultra processed ingredients that have been pounded and grounded to all sorts of stuff, why are we having to say that they're safe? And then what I do is I read the finer print that said it's safe in small consumption, but these ingredients, they're in everything. So, you know, if you're having a cereal bar for breakfast and an energy drink, and then you're having a microwave meal, you know, and something else for lunch, and, you know, a pizza, frozen pizza, and something else for an evening meal, and you're doing that 5 days a week, you are putting yourself at risk of all these physical side effects, but mental side effects as well.
And I'm pleased that you said that, because one of the things that I realised, and it's interesting, so 2020 when you started your business,
yeah,
and my notes here that I've got with me, because we spoke a lot in our research call. So you were diagnosed with PTSD and borderline personality disorder in 2022, is that right?
Yes.
So you'd already started going on this journey. What made you kind of start? Well, you said a minute ago, you said that you were seeing people just panic buying and just eating anything that they can. But what happened in those 2 years to make you go and get that diagnosis?
So I think in terms of the food, me doing the videos, I think for me, and I didn't realise it at the time, this is in reflection, I was almost saving myself by helping other people with food. And what I mean by that is I was sort of a few years before, my situation was I was married, got a son, 3 stepchildren, 2 dogs. And in the blink of an eye, I was on my own with one of the dogs. And I'd really fell out of love with food. In the sense, and I'm sure there's so many people that can relate, of what's the point of making a Sunday dinner for just one person? Yeah. I'd become really negative. So whilst I didn't realise it at the time, when I saw people panic buying, I'm like, let me help you eat food, let me help you. I think subconsciously that was for me. It was to help me fall back in love with food again, because I did love food before. And as I'm helping other people, what I didn't realise is I was really helping myself to fall back in love with food again. I
can see that inner process improvement person there going.
Everything from my sort of professional career is embedded in my DNA anyway. Everything that I do is, how do we do it, the easiest way, the quickest way.
So did you always suspect that you might have had borderline personality disorder? Was that there?
No, I just knew there was something wrong with me. I just knew there was something wrong with me. And I say that really clear, because I say to myself all the time, what's wrong with me? And it's a horrible thing to feel about yourself, isn't it? What's wrong with me? And I remember my sister, it was one of my suicide attempts. I think I was sort of sat on the floor, and my sister had come and the ambulance was on the way. And it felt, this might not be the reality, but it felt like she was over me saying, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? And that really still now is with me. I've let go of there's nothing wrong with me. I'm different. But it still sort of pulls on the heartstrings a little bit. So I'd spent a long time of what's wrong with me. And it was only being completely honest on the final suicide attempt where it was the most severe, and we were only a few tablets away from it being a different outcome, that they wouldn't let me go until I'd sat with the mental health team. And it was only then that they kind of took over. And then I went to speak to a psychiatrist, and then I got the diagnosis. So it was elements outside of my control that put me to being diagnosed, not my thoughts.
On reflection, and thanks for sharing that with me, I think to be able to sit here and on camera and talk about suicide attempts is really empowering for people to listen to, but being vulnerable is amazing. So thank you. Did you in hindsight, what did you see what those signs were? Was it because you talked about some of that? Your sister, did you say that she was over you? What were those signs? And I don't want people listening to say I've got borderline personality disorder, but what types of things might that look like?
Okay, so there's a few ways I can describe this. And so undiagnosed, if anybody's seen the Lego movie, sometimes that's how I would be. Everything is awesome.
Yeah.
Everything's brilliant. We all do our job. Everything's amazing. And I could feel like that for an hour, for 10 minutes a day. And then just like that, with no warning, I don't want to be here anymore. Really don't want to be here anymore. So that's what I know now about borderline personality disorder. Was now I can relate that to how it actually played out to me. Was it's the up, down, the up, down, the up, down, uncontrollably. And then I think that links on to the what's wrong with me. It's like, how could I have woke up this morning feeling like everything is amazing and nothing's happened, nothing's changed in the environment that I'm in, but now I'm actually looking at the tablets.
Interesting. Really interesting. Thank you. I don't think, absolutely. Disclaimer is there is to go and speak to a medical professional and get that support like you did.
Yeah.
Sadly, it could have been worse.
Yeah.
But sadly, I think it was late for you. But
yes,
it was great that you did, and I'm glad that you're here now to tell the story.
Yeah.
Linking it back, then you said about the effects that it's had on you, and the journey that you went on with food.
Yeah.
So have you been able to, has that helped you then, the food that you're eating? Has there been a connection that you've experienced with the food that you've been eating?
Yes. I'd love to say intentionally, but really by accident. I think the time that it stood out to me the most, which led me really to focus on this element in my business, it was Father's Day last year, and I'm doing really good, consistently doing really good, mentally. And we went out for Father's Day, me, my sister and my dad, and we went to the marina and we went to this little cafe. Now, I'm not a saint when it comes to food, and that's the first question I get asked. Do you eat healthy all the time? No. Full disclosure, I live on my own. Sometimes Saturday night is a bit like Bridget Jones' Diary. So I'm not perfect and I don't preach to be. But I'd sort of ordered this cafe breakfast food that a lot of it was fried, and it got bread and butter, and I'd had a bottle of Coca-Cola. I never drink Coke because I don't want to,
Yeah.
And thought nothing of it. Went home that day and I could feel the anxiety bubbling, a bit like when you switch the kettle on. And I could feel the anxiety building up. And I'm thinking, because of my job as process improvement, everything is to get to the root cause. So I'm like, what's caused this? Why do I feel anxious? What tools can I use? And I just couldn't put my finger on it. And the anxiety was building. And with anxiety, if anybody can relate, for me anyway, I can only speak for myself, is I feel like I've done something wrong. Am I in trouble? I feel sick. Something bad's going to happen. The negative thoughts start to creep in. And that night was the first time I had night terrors in a year, let's say. And the next morning, what was it? And I was able to make that direct link that it was the food. I was like, it's what I ate. And I think we spoke about this earlier, this saying you are what you eat. Yeah. Absolutely, that day I was what I ate.
Wow. Sorry to interrupt you, but I've got a really important message. This podcast wouldn't be what it is today without you and the brave individuals that come onto the podcast and tell their own story of vulnerability and adversity. So please jump onto your most favourite platform, the one that you're using right now, and click subscribe, like, and even leave a review, because without you and the comments that you leave, we can't do this. We can't normalise the conversation around mental health and well-being for leaders. Let's jump back into the episode. It's interesting. I experience anxiety. I think I've said it several times on this podcast, and I recently been trying to understand the feeling of anxiety versus stress, because I think we can mistake the two, that anxiety is very much that uncontrollable, don't often know where it comes from. Obviously you did the hindsight kind of research, but I know I personally, my experience of it is that stress is that pressure. It's something that, it's pressure that falls out of our control ultimately, or we lose control of. And I define it in that sense, that anxiety is just something we just don't really don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And so great that you've been able to pinpoint it.
Yeah.
And I also look at, and I'm sure my mum won't mind me saying this, she watches every episode.
Oh, hi, Mum.
Hello, Mum. And this is the first mention she's got. Yeah, she's normally the first person asking me when it's going live. And I know she experiences migraines, so and it's something that I've had. I don't know if it's hereditary. My initials might be a GP, but I'm not a medical professional whatsoever. I don't know if I'd want to be. It's an interesting world, but I know that she gets triggered by bananas and different things like that. So I can hear what you're saying. I can add my own logic to that.
Yeah.
And I know myself when, I mean, everyone, we call it a food coma, don't we, when we eat too much pizza on a Friday?
Yes.
I've been doing it for the last 15 years as a business on Payday Pizza that we have. And you eat too much pizza and you feel like rubbish. It's like having a hangover the next day.
It really is, yeah.
But that manifests in different ways when you've got, I'm going to call it BPD, so I don't keep saying borderline personality disorder. And I've not said it wrong yet. So, but yeah, I'm sure that impacts you chemically. One of the things that I wanted to go on to, though, is you talked about PTSD.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to make you talk about the event that caused it. That's absolutely understandable.
Yeah.
But I'd like to just talk about the aftermath and how that impacted you. And you now live with PTSD after quite a traumatic event that we won't go into, and that's absolutely fine. And I think people understand that. Yeah. How has that shaped your life after that traumatic experience and living with PTSD as a leader of a business particularly? Yeah,
so to say that it's changed my life forever, when I say that, I really mean that it's changed my life forever. The thing, there was a number of things that were happening, but the most sort of prolific thing for me was something had happened between my dogs and another dog. And I do want to talk about it because I hope people that are listening that sort of troll on social media can maybe see sometimes the impact that it has. Because what had happened was there was a Facebook campaign started against me. There were thousands of people that don't know me, really, they don't even know what my name is, that were commenting about me as a person, as a human being, in the most derogatory and negative ways. And I see it all the time now on social media, and that triggers me a lot actually. And the comments were, let's kill her. Let's kill her dogs. Let's stab her to death. Let's stab the dogs to death. Let's beat her to death. Let's beat the dogs to death. So apologies if this is triggering for anybody. So there's lots. There's what people are saying, you take it personally. You start to feel you are that person that they're saying. There's the fear, the real life fear, because at one point, the person that started the campaign, there was a time where there was around 1,000 people commenting at this point, and they put my address on there. So anybody can imagine that fear, the worry, every feeling, emotion I'm feeling at the same time. I was put on a police patrol. I didn't sleep for 5 days. I lost 3 stone in 2 days. I sat for 4 days. I didn't move to go to the toilet, to drink water, just looking at my front door. And there's other things, but when I think about my PTSD, that's initially where I go to. And I always consider myself as a bounce back kid. You know, no matter what you throw at me, I'll bounce back. And there was a specific moment where I just thought, I'm never going to bounce back from this. It was like a light bulb going off, and I was like, I'm not me anymore. I knew that everything about me was different, and I didn't know who I was anymore. And I knew I would never, ever, ever be Becky ever again. So that was the hard side of it. And there's loads of, you know, bits and bobs that go around it, but, you know, in a nutshell. But now, would I change it? No.
How has it made you, I've got so many questions. And first of all, thank you for sharing that, because you specifically said, let's not talk about it. Well done for being able to talk about it. And straight face until I said, well done. Wow. How does that impact you going out there and shouting about these recipe kits that need to be sorted, and the impact it has on your fairly recent diagnosis? How do you continue and push forward with PTSD? Because I'm sure so many people relate to that story in their own way.
So I think that goes back to when I said, would I change it? Obviously, I'd wish that situation not to happen, but I am a big believer that everything happens for a reason. And at the time, I was sort of, like I say, mourning Becky. I was like, she's gone. And it was a horrible thing. And now actually I'm the best. I know it's a cliche, but I'm the best version of myself ever. I've been through trauma therapy. And what I will say, I'm not telling anybody what to do. I'm talking about my experience. I got out what I put in on this journey. And let me tell you, I've put everything into this journey, in the therapy, in the techniques, the science behind panic attacks, the, you know, medical side of things, the root cause analysis. So I'm reaping the rewards because I put my everything, like my life depended on it. And I'm now in a place where I've been able to put that behind me and be able to say very proudly, I'm proud of me. I'm not this scumbag. I'm not this horrible person. I'm not the worst person in the world. I'm really proud of who I am today. And I'm really proud that I've gone on the journey that I have done. And I'm a confident enough person that if I believe in something, and I do when it comes to food, then I am going to talk about it.
I'm sure you've had lots of coping mechanisms that you've learned on that journey. It sounds like you put as much into it as you have got out of it. So yeah, it must have been a difficult step to sit down and say, I need trauma therapy. I'm going to have it.
Yeah.
Where does one even go to speak to somebody? Where did you go?
Yeah, so I was lucky in the sense that when I was in the hospital and the healthcare team wouldn't let me leave the hospital until they'd put steps in place, it just really spiraled from there. So once I spoke to the psychiatrist, I was then assigned a specialist, and then I was sort of recommended to go through a certain program that it's called the Freedom Program. And then that opened up to going for trauma therapy. So I feel really lucky in the sense that all of this was laid out for me, because I'll be honest with you, how I was feeling about myself, if you'd have said to me, you've got to get out of bed and brush your teeth, I'd have been like, that's far too much effort, let alone here's a pamphlet with all these numbers you can ring. Getting out of bed was an achievement in itself.
Did you ever think what the outcome would have been if you'd not done that therapy?
So the therapy on its own, I think the things I've talked about, the dog thing, but there's a few other things, sort of with personal relationships with my son, for example, that's no longer. Without that therapy, I wouldn't be able to see the truth. And what I mean by that as an example is my truth before therapy was everything that's happened has happened by me. Whereas now I say everything's happened to me. And it doesn't seem a lot, but it's very, very, very powerful, because when you say everything's by me, that's a ripple in the water of, I caused this, I'm a failure, I deserve this. What did I do in a previous life? When you say this happened to me, it's very freeing. Very freeing, because you're able to say, or I'm able to say, these things happened to me. What was my input on these? So what can I take responsibility and accountability for, which I have done? And what bits have I actually been taking accountability for that are these huge weights that I never, ever, ever should have taken accountability for? And the therapy allowed me to just let that go. And it's very freeing. So I would say that mentally I'm a very free person now as a result of that therapy.
And doing incredibly well as a leader of this amazing business over the last 4 years, that every time I open my social media, you're either showing me a recipe kit, or you're at an event talking about the impact it has on food, or yesterday saw you at a community event that you were attending shouting about the importance of food. So yeah, this is why we do it. When you walk into these rooms though, and I've just named some of the different places that I see you on and you talk about it, where do you think stigma sits with all of this? Because I keep hearing the word therapy and business and leaders, and I get mixed reviews on it. What's your stance on it? Do you think leaders should be talking more about therapy?
So I think in terms of stigma, I think something for me, and it happened to me recently, was something that's a bugbear of mine, is when mental health is all put into one pot. So I think you've mentioned, I put a post on LinkedIn about 2 months ago, help, I'm really struggling. And the the overwhelming with people that have been inspired, and you know, the thank you, and it's really lovely that you were vulnerable, and all those lovely messages. But there was a few that I'd been, the advice that I got was like part of this big mental health pot. And we don't all sit in the same pot. Because PTSD is different to borderline personality disorder, is different to schizophrenia, is different to neurodiversity. So
generalized anxiety,
social anxiety, just feeling stress, you know, catastrophizing. There's so much of it, and it's the equivalent of, you know, when we talk about people should go to therapy, or, you know, it's like you saying, I didn't feel well yesterday, and you being me giving you advice based on this whole pot of people not feeling well. So I think that's a stigma we could really get away from. But then I appreciate it's very new for people, and I don't think we as a society know enough about mental well-being, being mentally unhealthy, to actually be knowledgeable enough to give advice and support. But what I would say in terms of leadership is, if you can see that somebody's not doing so well, and again, that's a really broad statement, isn't it? Listen.
And that could be another leader sat right next to you on a boardroom. It could be an employee. Just going back to that post, I remember it was an overwhelming amount of people that you had respond to you. has that changed the way that you talk about, well, you're sat here with me, so I think I know what the answer is. Has it changed the way that you talk about mental health now as a leader, as a I guess mental health is a big part of your business anyway?
It is. I think it's changed my perspective for others. So I'm happy to talk about my diagnoses. I'm happy. I'm proud of me. I'm Becky. I'm 5'4". I've got brown eyes. I've got PTSD. I've got borderline personality disorder. That's who I am, and it's part of who I am. But when I did that post, it was purely for me. I live on my own, didn't have anybody to speak to, didn't expect anything back. It was an outlet. And I honestly shut my phone and went to bed that night. So when I looked at my phone the next day, but what I realised, and I'm not calling myself an advocate at all, but the amount of people that said thank you for being vulnerable, and they didn't need to share why they appreciated that. They just said thank you. So I think I'm more open now to being vulnerable in the hope that that helps somebody else, either help somebody else be vulnerable or be vulnerable themselves.
And ask for support and get the community rallying around like they did do with you. I'm smiling because I'm just thinking it's working. I think it was maybe before we were launched the podcast, but if anyone does that now, I see it and I thank them because it's huge to be vulnerable. And I know just listening to you might inspire so many people, the hundreds of thousands of people that listen to this episode that go, I need to ask for help. It's on a public forum.
Yeah.
And I always talk very consciously when we spoke on a call, I said that there's a difference between public and private stuff.
Yeah.
So you don't need to be public with everything that you are dealing with that is going on in your life. But there is a really important note to say some of it is fine being in the public domain because you're not alone.
Yep.
You don't struggle alone. And you are absolutely an example of that and the help and support that you've had.
Thank you.
I'm going to get less serious now.
Okay.
But, you do some. I'm looking at my note here. So, I'll start again. Your food and mood workshops have become really popular. So, can you tell us what kind of those workshops are and what the impact is that it's had on people that have gone along to these food and mood?
Food and mood.
I'm going to reinvent it to mood.
Call it what you want. It's getting its platform now. So, so that, whilst a lot of my business was by accident, that was truly intentional. My journey of wanting to know why I feel this way, what causes a panic attack, the science, the medical side of it, the physical, the coping mechanisms, food. And that's when I wanted to learn it for myself. And that's when I turned it into a workshop. I'm going to say it's a really simple title for some to say.
Food and mood.
Food and mood. That actually took me months to come up with that name because really what the essence of the workshop is about, it's around mental well-being or being mentally unhealthy and becoming mentally healthy. But there is still a stigma, and I'm glad you said that in many facets, in my experience, what I see, there's people that don't think there's anything wrong, in denial. There's people that are aware but really don't want to admit that to anybody. And there's people like myself that are really open about it. And I was really worried that if I use the term well-being, wellness, mental, that I'm going to lose a huge chunk of audience. So everyone can relate to mood.
Yeah.
We all have good moods. We all have bad moods. There's the rainy mornings, the winter blues, the going back to work after the holidays, to, mental unwellness. And that workshop was designed, and I continue to work on, just to help people in a really it's a really laid back format. There's no you should, you shouldn't, you must, you don't, you do. It's very much tidbits of information that help people understand, okay, the food choices that I'm making could actually be impacting how I feel. you know, we talk about sugar, and I think it's advertised, you know, we know that too much sugar is linked to obesity and type 2 diabetes and tooth decay. But it's actually just as, you know, detrimental for our mental well-being, because when we have, and I say as human beings, when we have too much sugar, it ignites in the brain what's called the roller coaster effect. So if you think about that, your mood starts to do this. And what people don't realise, which I help them through these workshops, is these are the foods that you're buying that are advertised as low fat, for example, that are full of sugar. You know, and let's talk about borderline personality disorder before medication. My mood's doing that anyway. Yeah. Everything's awesome. Don't want to go on anymore. You know, you know, everything's
You're having
awesome.
Those sugar crashes without
everything's awesome. Sugar. Celine Dion, you know, that sort of mood. So people like me or myself, the last thing I need is sugar, because I'm doing that anyway. So yeah, and I think the impact that the workshop's having is, it's my most proudest thing professionally in the world. There was a guy at a workshop at a company who was an attendee to a workshop that I did that told me he was quite proudly that he was drinking around 12 cans of energy drinks, I won't mention the name, a day. And I begged him, and he was adamant, you know, no, there's nothing you can do that will stop me. And it really affected me. I went home and I worried for this person. This is more than a business for me. I actually worried about this person. I went back 3 months later and I tried with him again. No, you won't get me to give them up. And I pulled him to the side afterwards and I said, will you make me a promise? I said, could you just replace 1 can a week with a glass of water? And he said, I promise. I said, you've promised me. He says, I promise I can do that. Easy. And I went back 3 months later and he'd come off them completely.
Wow.
He'd been off them for 2 months. And whilst he thanked me, and I could cry now, there really was no thanking me at all. All I'd done is gave him a bit of a challenge that he just wanted to beat me, really. He wanted to make sure that he could say, I told you so. And with everything I do, I talk about ripples in the water. I threw that stone. And this human being that was stood in front of me was unrecognisable. You know, peach skin, posture, glowing skin, hair looked better.
Energy.
Ironically,
energy levels probably were higher, were they?
Energy levels were higher. He was sleeping better. His mood was better. But he said, you cannot imagine the pain I was feeling in my mouth, in my teeth. He says, and it's gone.
Wow.
So
well
yeah,
done.
I would say
another
the
well
workshops.
done moment. Yeah, and so important, so huge. We talk about future projects. Have we got any exciting initiatives? Any projects that are coming up that you're working on that I can maybe drag out of you as an exclusive? Especially for leaders. I don't know if there's any particular ones that you're doing at the moment that might impact leaders.
So I think that there's a couple of things actually I'm working on for as a business model. What I'm finding when I'm working with companies is they'll have wellbeing leads and they'll have wellbeing strategies for the year, which is amazing. And I sort of speak to them about the amount of time that they invest in, you know, every year, or let's say once a quarter. This wellbeing lead has got to come up with a timetable of events. They've got to coordinate it. They've got to go out to companies. They've got to come up with things that are unique. So I'm working on at the moment is sort of like creating an annual service, if you like. So they just sign up to me once and they get a variety of stuff. So that's something that I'm working on because I like to be progressive and innovative. I'm going to smile as I say this. So for Gary, for 3 years, I have been knocking on the doors of the blue light families and the education sector. I'm going to say it again, 3 years. I'm persistent, if nothing else. And the doors have opened.
What's the goal? What's the goal of the business? 5 years, 10 years? Where do you see this going? And what support do you need to get there?
So the goal for me is, I mean, I would love to be working, you know, in a political aspect, you know, from the education sector, of changing the way that we educate children. I can only talk about food, but I think the education structure at the moment really needs overhauling. I think to teach a child how to make a lasagna to replicate is not enough. I think we need to be teaching children how to budget for food, how to batch cook, you know, what shelf life means, how to make food go further, not just how to replicate a lasagna. That's the big ultimate goal for me. And ultimately what I would love is to kind of have my own premises, to do these kind of food workshops, to empower people to say, go out into the garden, forget a recipe, because that's just replication. We can all replicate.
Yeah.
What food do you like? If you don't like galangal or you don't like ginger, don't put it in.
Don't like ginger.
I use that for a reason.
Ginger and celery should
not
be
celery.
banned. No.
Go out into the garden and pick what food you like. That's what the ultimate thing for me. I want to empower people and give them the confidence that just cook your food your way and don't allow yourself to be judged for it.
We're nearly running out of time. Can you believe it? I can't. I'm looking at the time on here and I'm shocked. I just want to talk about some of the tips that you can give to people. So first question I've got for you is, what's that one thing that someone can go away as a leader, as an employee, as an individual, whatever they might be, what's that one thing that somebody could do to change their life that isn't seeing those energy levels that you talked about earlier, that needs to just make that change?
So I think if you are a person that can relate to anything that I've been talking about, I would say feel empowered to speak to people about how you're feeling, but you don't have to explain why you're feeling that way. I did that a lot. I tried to explain even though I didn't, because I didn't want people to think I was crazy. So I think if you're resonating with any of that, just even if you do a recording to yourself on your phone or go and speak in the mirror or, you know, grab a friend or whatever, just blur it out. And I think I've already said this. If you're a leader and you can see that you think somebody is not doing so well, just listen. And it sounds simple. And there's a science behind it that actually when we speak, the person listening is already preparing a response. So when you listen, a really good technique to use is repeat every word that they're saying. And just listen. And you don't have to say, I know what you mean. Or you don't even have to have an answer or a solution or be a fixer. Just listen.
Do you think that's influenced your leadership style and the way that you go about business then, your own journey? Sounds like it's had a massive part of that then.
A massive. I think a few years ago there was saying of treat everybody the way you'd like to be treated. No, treat people how they would like to be treated. And that's what I do now. And it's part of who I am now. You know, when I'm having conversations with big corporations about, you know, booking workshops, to go into the networking events and talking about my business, to people coming to me saying, I'm really glad you were vulnerable. I treat them how they would want to be treated, because a lot of people really close to me treated me how they would treat themselves, and it was really brutal. It made me feel worse than I actually already felt about myself, if that was possible.
I'm hearing what you're saying, and I feel like we've not addressed quite a big elephant in the room that I'd like to just get in at this stage. Hopefully the people that are listening are still importantly listening to this. I went to a workshop a couple of years ago, and it was about food guilt and food shame, especially from a poverty point of view, but people that just struggle to eat. What takeaway is there for somebody that has to deal with guilt, that struggles to eat, that has I don't know, one of the many different types of food disorders?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's an expertise that are you happy to comment on?
So I think it's a really broad topic, because you've covered a few of, like, maybe food guilt because they can't afford to buy food, and then you've got people with eating disorders. So it's a really sort of like, there's lots of buckets that sit within that. I'm going to exclude eating disorders just because I have worked with people, but I don't want to give anybody advice, because I think they'd see right through me that I'm kind of blagging it, if you like.
I appreciate your honesty.
But I think any food choice that you make, you should never feel guilty about the food choices that you make, because it's a food choice.
Yeah.
It's what you chose to do. And it's what you chose to do for a reason. So let's take, for example, binge eating. It's in my brain with my personality disorder to be a binge eater. And I was actually speaking to a lady who really shared a lot with me about why she's a binge eater. Very touching for me that she felt comfortable enough to share. We're not bad people because we binge eat. And sometimes binge eat, it does make you feel better. I think it's about getting to understand why you're binge eating. For example, I know there's other elements of it. And you don't really have to make sacrifices. I think we're built in a world where we believe that if I want to lose weight, I've got to go on low fat and start eating kale. And actually, some of the advice I give to people about having a better night's sleep is just change the time that you eat. You don't have to change what you eat. So it's this perception that to be good, I've got to be really good. And actually, you don't. I think people, that are going to food banks, I can say from being a trustee, I'm not anymore at a food bank, that we are, it's a broad statement to make, and I hope I don't offend anybody, but there's more of us that are in this situation than not. So people that are using the food banks are not the minority, we are the majority. And I think, there's lots of people that you would look and think you've got lots of money that are actually using food banks. And I think that's why that food's there. And I just don't think anybody should be made to feel guilty for any food choice that they make at all, ever.
I love that. And especially I'll not talk about it now, but the conversation we're having with the event you went to recently, which was all about giving them fresh food and making sure that I had access to that. And it wasn't all that packaged stuff, but if that's all you've got, then that's all you can eat. And, look after yourself and just balance that out in a way.
Yeah.
Becky, thank you. You've really opened my own eyes. I'll just throw this a little bit of information in on. So I think it was probably about 7 years ago, I went to a nutritionist. Actually, I went to the gym, and the nutritionist said to me, the person at the gym said to me, go and talk to the nutritionist. It's probably a good idea. And I did. And walking through that door, I struggled to walk from my car to the door. I was that tired. I was that lethargic. I mentally couldn't do it, but I did it. And one of the things, I've been vegetarian since I was 14, 15. And I said to her, I've always wanted to go vegan. And she went, let's do it then. And what that changed for me was what you've just said there. And it doesn't have to be veganism. It can be anything you possibly want to. But I started making meals. I stopped opening cans of things and packets of things. I thought I'd leave this till the end. I can see you're excited. And curries, I can make an amazing curry. I can make an amazing spaghetti bolognese, chili con carne and things like that. And I know what is going into those, the lentils, the tomatoes. And they're so easy when we look at doing it. And I don't want to guilt, shame anybody, because everyone's got to learn. But I live my life by a phrase, and my nan reminded me of this before she passed away, was that in life, if we know better, we need to do better. And I've learned how much better I need to eat, and I still do the odd drive-through takeaways and the donuts and things like that I get, but I also recognise what I'm putting into my body and the impact it has on me. And we've had previous guests on that talk about they had they self-diagnosed as MS. That's what I thought was going on with me. And the combination of stress, the combination of food made a huge impact on me. So just wanted to back up what you're saying. Is there anything we've missed? Is there anything, how can people get in contact with you? How can they watch this journey of these programs and say, help, I want to watch your I was going to call you funny credit because I mean like that you're like how to make these like is that an insult or a compliment? I don't know. We'll push over that.
No, it's not. It's just I'm not sure how many of the audience will remember that person. But
I'm 41. I shouldn't know the name, but yeah. But so, how can they find you? Where are you and what you're on TikTok?
Yeah, so the company's called SimpliciB. And I'm on all social media platforms. So if you type that name into a search engine, or I am on TikTok, but I'm 45 years old, so I'm definitely not one of those people that it's like 1 minute I'm wearing something and then I snap my fingers and I'm something else. It's just me awkwardly talking into a camera.
With some expert camera people,
bubbling pasta and noise in the background. So any social media platform, I put loads of content on there around cooking. Why am I eating this for my tea tonight? This food's got this in it and that in it and stuff. So, yeah.
And the impact it has on all of us, including our employees, our leaders, our board of directors that need to eat a little bit better. I'm not no pointed comments to any directors I've sat with previously.
Yeah.
We were all allowed to chippy tea at some times. There we go, just in case they're listening still. Yeah. Or chippy lunch. That might be later. But yeah, thank you. So just to make that really clear, so SimpliciB.
So it's SimpliciB. So if you would say simplicity,
it's got a B on the end.
But it's got a B in on the end.
That's easy. That's easier than how I tried to explain it.
No one can say it. It's fine.
Thank you. Really appreciate you coming. I'll let you get out of this really hot studio. And yes, let's keep watching what you're up to. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.